But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will the coming of the Son of Man. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field. One will be taken, and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together. One will be taken, and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this: if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. For the wisdom we find in this ancient story. When Kat asked me to preach this morning, the first Sunday in Advent, I immediately wanted to know if the Moravian star would indeed be up, because after all, it just wouldn't be Advent at Faith without that star. Some of you maybe remember when we renovated the sanctuary as we put in the air conditioning. It was bad enough that the scaffolding made it impossible for folk to sit in their pews. But then we discovered we couldn't put up the Moravian star, and let me tell you, that was hugely distressing. I don't remember how long we've had the star. I'm sure some of you do, but we've had it a long time. The Moravian star is a tradition. It reminds us of the past, the Christmases, past memories, past hopes. We remember all the wonderful times in this church, those times under that star. The candlelit Christmas services, the Christmas pageants, different every year thanks to our dramatist, Susan Johnson. When our children were young. When I came to faith, the children were asked to play their instruments as a prelude on Christmas Eve. Anna's flute malfunctioned, and I don't think she's ever played it since. There was the time two shepherds got into a scuffle and one fell off the chancel. I have an indelible image of Eva, hard to believe, as a sheep. And I remember when Cal was a baby the baby Jesus, in fact, not just the baby, in a former church. And that reminds me of the time Brian, I'm including all of these because they were all supposed to be here this morning and I was going to tell on them. There was the time Bryant refused to be the donkey. That pageant was in my former church in Brooklyn. And the woman, Susan's with the children. The woman who put together the pageants was named Narcissa Tittman. I was rather intimidated by Narcissa Tittman, which may explain why Bryant refused to be the donkey. And I don't remember how the donkey was resolved, but I do remember that year it was decided that a large star would descend from the balcony at exactly that point in the pageant when the star came to rest where the child lay. The star was rehearsed and rehearsed just to get the timing right. Be thankful, Andy. You don't have to do that. And when the time came, darned if that star didn't come down just exactly right on cue. However, as I was anxiously staring at it, I noticed a large price tag hanging from one of its points. There's a sermon in that, I think. When we see that star in our sanctuary, doesn't it remind us of all those memories, the past, of our families before death or divorce or separation changed them forever, of the way Christmases used to be, if only in our imaginations? Without the Moravian star, how do we see in the dark? Because it's dark now. It's a dark day. The days are shorter, darkness descends before we're even home from work. Our world is dark. There are wars and famines and hurricanes and economic insecurity and tyrants who create chaos. It's a dark time. They call the day after Thanksgiving the biggest shopping day of the year, Black Friday. How appropriate. I remember when some years ago, Lowe's home improvement stores decided to call their Christmas trees family trees. There was such a hue and cry that they were forced to go back to calling them Christmas trees. And I thought it was so amusing that the army, who wanted to put Christ back into Christmas, wanted to protect the Christmas tree, which ironically originated as a pagan symbol. So in some ways, the description Black Friday is appropriate. I digress. The world is dark. Isaiah's world was dark. His country, Judah, was threatened. In the passage that precedes chapter 2, Isaiah announces, "For you shall be like an oak whose leaf withers, like a garden without water. The strong shall become like tinder, and their work like a spark, and they and their work shall burn together with no one to quench them." Yep. Isaiah lived in a dark time. His country, Judah, was threatened by the powerful Assyrians to the north and east and by the Egyptians to the south and west, and it would not end well for Judah. In times like Judah's, in times like ours, the task of a prophet is difficult. On the one hand, one has to name the things that need to be named. On the other hand, one has to point to the fact that God, our God, is good, and God will redeem God's people. So the prophet's task is to help the people see the dark. Isaiah's words move from the valley of Judah's reality of war and desolation to chapter 2, to the highest mountain of God, where swords are no more and peace reigns. Isaiah proclaims, "In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it." I am fond of remembering the only time I have been to Israel, and the first place we went to was Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel isn't the highest mountain in Israel. Nonetheless, it seems to me that you could see all of Israel from up on that mountain. And I understood why our ancient ancestors thought mountains were holy. One feels close to God on a mountain. So during this season of Advent, I invite you to think of those places where you feel closest to God, those places where we can see even in the darkness. Where is it that we gain perspective in our turbulent times? Where is it that we remember what God has done in the past, distant and not so distant? I've been trying to watch the Ken Burns documentary on the American Revolution, And it seems to me that part of the value of this epic chronicle of our history is the perspective it gives to us for our current dilemma. While dire, our situation is not the first time our country has faced upheaval and unrest. We've been here before, and we've survived, and it's good to remember that. So where do you feel closest to God? Where are you able to see in the dark? God's intention for us is peace. God's intention for us is that there will be no weapons, a life in which all peoples, every nation lives in peace. When we look at the faces of our children, of the precious children in our midst, what do we see? The future is spread out before them, full of promise and hope and love, and God make it so, peace. And even though it may feel like a peace that is distant, when our streets are full of armed troops who are being attacked, it seems to me that during this Advent season, we could think about letting our light shine by making peace. Isaiah says we should beat our swords and plowshares, our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks. Those, as was pointed out, are agrarian symbols. A plowshare is used to dig up the ground, and a pruning hook is used to cut away that which needs to be cut away, so plants can flourish. In our lives, how can we become gardeners who plant and nurture? One of my favorite poets is Wendell Berry, and he wrote an entire collection of poems entitled Farming, a Handbook. And the first poem goes like this: a grower of trees, the gardener, the man born to farming, whose hands reach into the ground and sprout. To him, the soil is a divine drug. He enters into death yearly and comes back rejoicing. He has seen the light die down in a dung heap and rise again in the corn. His thought passes along the row ends like a mole. What miraculous seed has he swallowed, that the unending sentence of his love flows out of his mouth like a vine clinging in the sunlight and like water descending in the dark. That the unending sentence of his love flows out of his mouth like a vine clinging in the sunlight. How can we be gardeners this Advent, helping someone else grow physically or emotionally? How can we tend what needs to be tended? Our gardens, this church, our neighborhoods, our city. How can we live in the light this dark season? Well, finally, I want to talk about baptism. And I thought I would change it this morning, and I thought, nope, because maybe one of the ways we see in the dark is by remembering our baptisms, not just Willa's, that we hope is going to happen sometime soon. So I want to think about baptism. I suppose there are those who say we Presbyterians are a little loosey-goosey on the matter of that sacrament. We do not have the stricter regulations that some of our sister denominations do. However, that's not to say that baptism isn't one of the most significant moments in our life together as a church. And there is at least one Presbyterian tenet of baptism that may be more stringent than some of our sister denominations. We Presbyterians believe that baptism is something that can only happen in this community, which is not to say that we don't recognize baptisms from other denominations. We do. But when we baptize a child here at Faith, it has to be in this community. in the life of this congregation. One of my favorite Willimon stories is about the time when he was a Methodist bishop in North Carolina. Willimon was asked to baptize a 12-year-old boy in a small rural church. The only hitch was that this little guy wanted to be immersed, which Presbyterians typically do not do. Willimon had hardly ever baptized anyone by immersion, but he said, okay, he'd be willing to do that. And so when he arrived at this little church, the pastor greeted him along with the small boy, and the pastor introduced them, whereupon the boy said, "They tell me you don't do many of these. I'd feel better if we had a run-through first." Willimon allowed as to how he thought that was a good idea, and they went into the church's fellowship hall where there was a newly purchased font dressed up with flowers, and Jeremy, the little boy, said, "After you say the words, then you take me up the steps. Do you want me to take off my socks?" Willimon allowed as to how he could leave them on if he wanted. Well, the Sunday service was wonderful. Willimon preached on baptism, the choir sang a baptismal anthem, and then the whole congregation proceeded into the fellowship hall and gathered around the font. Willimon went through the baptismal liturgy, and then he asked Jeremy if he had anything to say to the church before his baptism. Jeremy said, yes, actually, he did. "I just want to say to all of you that I'm here today because of you. When my parents got divorced, I thought my world was over. But you stood by me. You told me the stories about Jesus. And I just want to say to you today, thanks for what you did for me. I intend to make you proud as I'm going to try to live my life as Jesus did." I get choked up every time I tell that story, and actually Willimon did too, because when he was being led by the little boy up those steps, he turned to Willimon and said, "Are you okay?" Jeremy was baptized, and the church sang a great hallelujah. Whenever we baptize a child, or anyone for that matter, we promise to be there for them. We promise to stand there for them. We promise to tell them the stories about Jesus. Indeed, we promise to show them the light. In this dark season, in this dark world, we promise to not only show them the light, but to be the light for them. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord.